Hello, welcome back to Fallout 76. After I published the last video, I had a few comments pointing out a couple of things. One was that the shredder attachment to the minigun still benefited from the radioactive strength perk. So in other words, while the auto axe did not benefit from that perk, the shredder still did. And the other one was that you could work around the Pounders mod. So in other words, if you didn't have the 4th star legendary Pounders attachment for your auto axe, you could still solo the boss without getting off the platform. But it's not a case of one size fits all, especially when it comes to ghouls versus humans. The approaches for both have to be different. So let me share some details with you, and I'll show you how I came to these conclusions, so you too can take advantage of this approach. So let's start off with the shredder. I've never been much of a shredder user myself, but I started testing it in the PTS because I wanted to see how it played with the crippling changes. Because as you may well know, crippling is going to be a big part of the new update once the new season starts. So when I started to see a few comments both on my YouTube channel and across the internet of people saying that the shredder still worked with radiation strength, I wasn't particularly surprised. Because like I said before, I had been testing with it in the PTS. But after testing this, I was really surprised. I'm going to walk you through the journey so you can see which perks actually benefit what style. Because I did differential testing against both the shredder and the auto axe. And some perks turned out to be useful and some perks turned out to be useless. So let me walk you through the results, so people that may not be familiar with these things can also take advantage of some of the things that I learned as part of this process. And by far the most important factor about all this is the radiation strength perk. So here's some footage of me testing the PTS, and you can see that as soon as my glow drops off, the damage basically becomes a tenth of what it was. And as soon as I drink something to get my radiation up, back up goes the damage, and the difference is massive. On paper, radiation strength is supposed to give you 150% extra damage, which is pretty big if you think about it, but the results we're seeing are literally a 10-fold increase. Yes, it goes up by 10 times. So yes, the first and most important takeaway about all this is that you need to be a ghoul to benefit from the shredder. A human will simply not be able to get as much damage. So let me follow that up with a test on the live server. Initially I started with all the perks that I could think of, and then I started removing the perks one by one, just to see which ones actually mattered. And in case you're not familiar with it, the method to bring down the shield is to go around in third person view and try to just clip the shield generator. For most weapons this will be a really bad approach, but because the shredder does so much damage, just touching it every so often still does a massive amount of damage. I would not recommend this with any other kind of weapon, and only if you're a ghoul. It does take a bit of persistence and patience, but faking in one direction and then going in the other does let you get your hits every so often. So the perks I started with were Incisor, Radioactive Strength, Basher, and one level of Heavy Weapons boosting perk. Then we have Science Monster and Stabilized. And under Agility I have all the Furious perks, because as a test I've turned my minigun into a Furious minigun. The second star is Crippling. And under Luck we have One Gun Army, because I'm holding a minigun, right? So based on what we saw, the results were pretty much the same as we saw in the PTS. Basically we're doing about 1000 or 1100 damage per hit. And because the shredder hits so rapidly, essentially the robot's health just melts. And yes, the net result is faster than the auto axe. Or at least it is after the latest patch, when radioactive strength no longer applies to auto axes. Next up we'll remove One Gun Army. And to be honest, I did expect this to make a difference, but you'll see for yourself. And yes, it takes a lot of patience to replicate that method of just clipping the shield generator with your shredder. And it is possible to fall off the platform. So be very careful about how you move, because if you fall off the platform, you'll just have to restart again. To my complete surprise, we were still getting 1100 damage per hit without one gun army. It looks like one gun army only gives you a benefit if you're firing the minigun. It does not apply to the Shredder at all. So while we had the shield down, I also took off Basher, and as you can see, Basher has a massive effect. Basically, it halves how much damage you do. And the same goes for Incisor. It has no effect on bashing, because it seems that technically speaking, bashing is not a melee attack. Then I took off Radioactive Strength just for a sanity check, and we got the same results as in the PTS. Basically 1/10 of the damage. Then put it back on and you can see that it goes back up to 1100 damage. And just for the record, Stabilized does make a difference. You should always be using Stabilized, and you should always get something that boosts your damage as the first star. So by this point, it's absolutely clear that Radioactive Strength is the main factor when it comes to using the Shredder. So I took it off, and I added more perks to boost my heavy weapons damage. And on top of that, I ate some foods to boost my melee damage and my strength, because each strength point also gives you 5% extra melee damage. Then I also sucked down some Psycho Buff, which gives you 25% extra damage and 3 more points of strength. And this is why I wouldn't recommend the method of running around and hitting the shield generator with your Shredder, unless you're a ghoul and using Radioactive Strength. Because you just can't get enough hits in. You're much more liable to screw up in some way and have to restart again. It's just not time efficient. Instead, I would recommend the shotgun. If you have a pepper shaker, then that's great, but that's something that not that many people have. But you can get almost as good results just by using a shotgun. Let me show you with a cold shoulder. I would strongly recommend that you add all 9 levels of shotgun damage boosting perks under Strength, Enforcer under Agility, and Critical Savvy under Luck. For these tests I'm using the cold shoulder, and it is more effective, but any shotgun can be used in this way. It does take you longer than using the pepper shaker, but it is effective, and it doesn't use up too much of your core. Just make sure that it is a ballistic shotgun though. I have done this in the PTS with a 2-barrel non-legendary shotgun, it just took longer. So the major difference is really in how many stimpaks you have to use to heal after every missile volley. But if you do have a troubleshooter's power armor set, you basically won't have to heal anyway. Through a bit of testing, I found that the most optimal approach is to maximize your shotgun damage by using perks, then bring the shield down as close to 0 as possible, then swap the perks out to boost the damage of whatever you're going to use to kill the boss, whether it's a Shredder or an auto axe or whatever else. And because the robot doesn't do that much damage to you while you're standing on the platform, you can take the time to swap your perks. Just make sure that you're healing after every missile volley if you're not in a troubleshooter set. In this case I'm going to swap all my perks to benefit the Shredder, but without Radioactive Strength. The point of this test is to see how much benefit we get from melee boosting and strength boosting consumables. And it turns out that the Shredder basically gets nothing. And that was kind of surprising. It seems that the Shredder just works in a weird way. And once again we'll swap our perks, but this time I'll swap them to the auto axe. So that's Incisor and 6 levels of Slugger perks. Then swap out Enforcer and replace Critical Savvy with Bloody Mess. Then finish off the shield and go over to the auto axe. So we are doing 710 damage per hit, which is not good enough. You have to be closer to 1000 in order to finish the boss. And of course if your auto axe breaks, then you're screwed. But there are foods that give you bigger bonuses. By far the easiest one is a tasty Mutant Hound stew, because it's very easy to farm Mutant Hound meat just by going to Westec. Just make sure that you have the Butcher's Bounty perk also equipped under Perception, and that gives you a chance to get more meat. Plus Super Duper when you craft it for a chance to get more. The other options are the tasty mutton meat pie, but that requires sheep squatch meat, which is not that easy to farm, or the Jaguar roast. And it's not too difficult to farm Jaguar meat, but the Mutant Hound meat is the easiest by far. And to boost strength, I was using a Deathclaw steak, but you can upgrade that to +8 strength with a Deathclaw Wellington. Getting the eggs is the most difficult part, but it is possible to get them. And just for the record, I was using a minigun with a crippling 2nd star. But what about if we change it to Furious? And yes, we do see a significant boost to the amount of damage we do with a shredding minigun, but 250 something is just not high enough. So I've added radioactive strength once again, so we're gonna test how a ghoul with a shredder works. So under strength we have Basher and a whole bunch of heavy weapons perks. Under intelligence we have stabilized and science monster. And under agility we have action boy plus all the onslaught boosting perks. Then under luck, we have Bloody Mess instead of one gun army because we've shown that one gun army does not work. So that's now 1200 damage per hit. So it is noticeably higher, and that means that the 1st star actually makes a difference. But what about if we take off all the onslaught perks under agility? And it does decrease the amount of damage you do. And I did expect to lose a bit of damage when I took off the heavy weapons boosting perks, but that didn't seem to make a difference. So it looks like shredding miniguns do kind of behave weirdly. But does a Furious minigun with a shredder work for humans? I took off the radioactive strength perk, and as you can see I am not feral, which means that I'm basically a human. So we get about 90 something damage with the shredder, and then we'll eat some tasty mutant hound stew, which should give us a 200% damage boost. So I think that we can definitively say that melee boosting consumables do not improve your performance with a shredding minigun. And just to double check, I ran the test again, and this time I had a psycho buff active, I was not feral, and I had a +5 strength and a 200% melee damage boost. 111 damage is definitely not being boosted by the amount that it should be. But let's repeat the same test with a +5 and a +200% melee damage boost with an auto axe. So Incisor and 6 levels of Slugger, Science Monster, all the onslaught boosting perks, and Bloody Mess. I don't have the Psycho Buff perk, I am not feral, but we have all the other bonuses. So once again we are testing as a human. Bring the shield down. So this is pretty good. Getting values close to 1000 is about how much you need in order to kill the robot before the heat comes on. And if you're quick, you also have enough time to repair the thing before the heat kills you. Yes, you will die, but still counts as a victory. And as you can see, I don't have the Pounders mod on this auto axe, but without the Pounders mod, it's actually inferior to other 1st stars, because you can only build up to 9 onslaught stacks. With the Pounders attachment, you can add 10 more stacks, which basically doubles the damage you do. But the important thing is that the auto axe does not benefit from the onslaught boosting perks, whereas the Basher does. So yeah, okay. So it looks like there's a bit of a discrepancy between the two. So the takeaway from the testing I've done and shown you is that for ghouls, you should be using the Shredder, because the radioactive strength perk seems to be bugged and gives you a 10-fold increase to the damage of your shredder. I have to say that that's clearly a bug, but in the PTS that hasn't been fixed. So for the next update at least, this method will still work for ghouls. So radioactive strength and bashers under strength, sentinels under intelligence, and bloody under luck. Those are the cards that everybody using a shredder should be using. And if you use a furious minigun like I was, then you should be using the onslaught boosting perks under agility. But if you're a human, then everything I just said goes out the window. In your case, you should be using an auto axe, and if you don't have the Pounders mod, then you should be farming for tasty mutant hound stews. Or if you want, you can customize your armor and your weapons to boost your strength, and just use a glowing meat steak for 100% extra melee damage. That will also boost your melee damage by about 200%. But I think the point is that it is possible for people who may not have super powerful weapons or gear to solo the boss before the heat kills them. I haven't tested with a completely non-legendary shredder, but I'm pretty sure that you would get close to 1000 damage anyway. So like I said in the thumbnail of my previous video, it is easier for lower level players to solo the boss. And given the results of this video, it's even easier than I thought. Oh my god. So the situation is extremely ironic. The devs have made changes to stop people soloing the boss, but it's now even easier than it ever was. In any case, I think that's enough for this video because I'm fairly sure you get the point by now. So until the next video, take care of yourselves out there and have fun.